I welcome Professor K. Sridharan. He is rightfully called the Einstein of India. He is a particle physicist, worked in practically all the prestigious universities and research institutions in India, also abroad in CERN. Particle physics is an extremely engaging and interesting subject. Many of you must have heard of the name God particle. Little later I'll request him to explain in 2 lines what exactly God particle means. Now, from the advanced study of particle physics, he imbibed in himself various concepts of Indian philosophy, particularly the Cārvāka philosophy, the book which he has written, and we have been asked to review this particular book or talk about it, is Ajita. Ajita is a philosopher belonging to the Cārvāka school of Indian philosophy and was contemporary to Gautam Buddha and Mahavir Jain. I'll just briefly introduce the book and then we'll go back to his roots and his passion, that is advanced physics and particle physics. Ajita is contemporary of Buddha, 500 BCE. Cārvāka philosophy, as you all know, is the philosophy of materialism in the world of Puritan Sanskrit literature. As is the famous sloka by Cārvāka is Javat jivam sukham jive ridam krutya ghrutam pive vasmi bhutasya dehasya punaragamana kruta. What Professor Sridharan does is he compares, I think himself, he will clarify that, and he creates an imaginary character in modern day Bombay. He is a typical Bombayite. He doesn't call it Mumbai, he calls it Bombay. He is now in Bangalore with Ajim Premji University and likely to come back to Bombay. So that this character which he compares and who he imagines, his name is Moksha Malhar. Moksha Malhar is brought up in Bombay, studies philosophy, goes abroad and studies philosophy, and imbibes all the traits of Cārvāka philosophy which Ajita had been advocate. So that is the story. The story goes through different aspects of Bombay's social, cultural life, the division of Bombay into Gujarat and Maharashtra. We'll come to that a little later. Now I'll start with Professor Sridharan. His journey as a particle physicist. Let me remind him slightly that there have been 4 YouTube videos. You can see it in the YouTube. 4 episodes. It's called Friendship with Science, where he was interviewed by 2 eminent physicists. Please watch that and be observed in the fascinating world of particle physics. Now, to begin with, I'll ask him, take him back to that particular interview, that when he talks of atom, what exactly is atom in terms of Greek philosophy? The comparative Indian philosophy term is Anu, indivisible smallest particle of the universe. How it got divided by modern day physics and how particle physics was born. Can I request Professor Sridharan to speak about it?
Thank you, Mr. Rajguru, for that very kind introduction. Yes, I want this to be less about myself and more about this book. Inshallah, you'll then buy it. I just also want to tell you that this beautiful image on this cover was designed by my dear friend and a very renowned artist, Nalini Malani, and she was really generous in sharing this image with me. So if you buy this book, you're getting a Nalini Malani original for something like 400 rupees. So think about it. Actually, particle physics is a good place to start, as you said. I am a particle physicist. I'm a theorist. I don't work in labs because I'm very cool. So particle physics is the study of matter at the most fundamental, what we understand as the most fundamental particles. And the particles we talk of in this area now are really the atoms I mean, atoms, if one takes atoms as atomos, the Greek etymology for the word atom is atomos, which means that which is indivisible. Then the particles of particle physics today are the true atoms, if you like. And this atomism has a very, very ancient history. In fact, it goes back to precisely the period where this book is set in. It goes back to 500 BC, where my protagonist, Ajita Kesakambali, also appears. Okay. And atomism was actually developed simultaneously in Greece and also in India at the same time. In India, the Vaisheshikas, the Jains, even some Buddhist schools were atomists. The Ajivikas, who were also contemporary with the Cārvākas, they were also atomists. But the Cārvāka philosophers refused to be part of this atomistic philosophies. The reason being, the Cārvākas were a rigorously materialistic school, by which I mean that they believed that matter is the fundamental thing, and there is nothing except matter. To which the Buddhists responded to them by mocking them, saying, okay, come on, even you should know that there is something called a mind, so where does mind come from? And the Cārvāka said something extremely important, and that is actually lies at the crux of all atomic theories, and that is that if you take, and I'm kind of paraphrasing it because this was not exactly the way they said it, I'm using much more a modern kind of language to describe it. But their point was that if you look at matter at a very fundamental, if you look at stuff at a very fundamental level, it's all matter. It's all these particles that we are talking about. There's nothing except matter. But if you take composites of this, if you put these elementary stuff together, these Lego blocks, if you start putting them together, then somehow life emerges from it, the mind emerges from it, consciousness emerges from it. So this idea of emergence, I am sticking out my neck and saying it for the very first time, can be attributed to the Cārvākas, to these people, because they were the first people to explicitly say that life and consciousness and mind are emergent phenomena. Emergence is in fact an idea that's driving research across many academic areas now. It's become too irritating, in fact, it's often used with not much effect, but that idea actually can be traced back to my heroes. Why did I, if I may, right, why did I start thinking of, I think Saikat mentioned this, and I told him I'm writing a book about Cārvākas. He said, oh, is there a novel in there? And yeah, that question can genuinely be asked. And of course, you have to read it to know whether there is a novel there. But my question was, actually we don't know anything about Ajita Kesakambali. There's absolutely no historical record. So this book is a book of fiction. I have to say that. But my question was, what was it that prompted these philosophers, or group of philosophers in the 5th century BC, think of it, 2500 years ago, why was this guy, or we don't even know he was a guy, it could have been a woman, why did they say that there is nothing, there is no soul, there is no God, there is no heaven, there is, absolutely. In fact, they differed from the Buddhists in the sense that they even didn't accept the notion of an afterlife, and they didn't believe in karma. So what was it? So my question was, what was the life experiences of such a person? What prompted this person? So I took Ajita as one character and tried to imagine his life. What could have driven him towards a radical kind of philosophy like this? There are some interesting interventions. At some point I would like to read, if you will allow me, but maybe we can continue the conversation. And actually, if you'll allow me, I would like to read from the book.
Yeah, I think that will be very interesting and very observing.
So it is actually important. I want especially the younger people in the audience to pay attention to this, that we should realize that we had a very, very very syncretic is, I don't want to use the word syncretic, but it was a very multi-dimensional world that existed. Not just in India, but in 5th century BC, this world was a different place. Okay. In Greece, in Persia, in India, it was just magical. So there were various differing philosophies, but differences were respected. Debates were a very, very integral part of the intellectual culture of those times, and much of the book deals with all that. Okay. Along with the Cārvākas, who are the materialists, there was a very important group of philosophers, you could call it a kind of religion, and that was the Ajivikas. Makkali Goshala was the main Ajivika we know of. And the Ajivikas, as scholars have written about it, between 500 BC and 200 BC, they were the single most dominant philosophical tradition in this country, okay, which is quite a staggering statement, because essentially after 200 BC, they were just wiped out, literally. Okay, so Makkali Goshala existed around the same time as Buddha, Mahavir, Ajita Kesakambali, and so on. And he is also in some texts, said to have been the teacher of both Mahavir and Buddha at different times, though both of them moved away from his very extreme philosophies. Makkali Goshala is a fascinating character, so I could not resist the temptation of setting up a conversation between Goshala and Ajita. So this thing I'm going to read is when they meet for the very first time. So I'll start reading from here. Ajita's friend Maitreya has taken him to meet Goshala. This is on page 109 if someone is trying to follow me. So they meet, and after the usual exchanges, Makkali starts by saying, "Then I guess you are an atomist. I have accepted the reality of atoms. Everything we have around us is made of these indivisible units, and I find that fascinating. Atoms are governed by their own cosmic laws, how they move, how they come together to create the composite world that we live in, including our own cells, how they interact and cohere. We believe that we are able to exert our will and act freely, but in that substratum, there are processes happening that are beyond our control. As individuals, our freedom to act only has small local consequences. On a cosmic scale, none of this matters, because that is completely determined by the laws that govern the atoms. Of course, most people don't understand this, or don't want to, and instead caricature me as a fatalist," said Goshala, smiling. "I find the idea of atoms an attractive possibility, but I'm uncomfortable with the fact that they are not observable. I can accept the fact that everything is made of elements because these elements in themselves are observable. You seem to be too worried about observables." "Yes, I am," says Ajita, "because I feel if we give up that, then anything goes. We need to be grounded in the reality of the world we live in." "What is the world we live in? You or I? Do we live in the same world?" "Of course we do," says Ajita, a bit agitated. "Your world does not account for my dreams, my fears, my anxieties, or even something as real as my toothache. But that is your subjective experience. We all agree on a world, an external objective world, don't we? Pay attention to dreams, to the worlds that spread out in your dreams. You don't practice any austerities, do you?" Makkali asks him. Ajita says, "No, I don't see any point in doing them. You have to learn to be a shramana. I tell you this, stay without food or water for 10 days and 10 nights at a stretch, and you will see your world changing. Extend that the next time to 20 days and 20 nights, and you will see another world altogether." "What are you saying? This is not even sensible." "I am saying you live in the comfortable life of a city dweller. Have the courage to give that up. I tell you, when I have stayed without food or water for 40 days, I have seen beings and creatures you can't even imagine. those are called hallucinations. And because because you have a name for them, they don't exist. I have seen them, and why should anyone tell me that my experience is not true? I have heard stories about you, Goshala, fasting for 40 days at a stretch and having nothing more than a dry stone to rub on your tongue. I'm sure your mind starts playing games when you push yourself to that extreme. But it proves nothing. Meanwhile, you and I can both see that tree right now, and that is a given. There is no disputing that. We have only agreed that my sensory experience and yours actually coincide, and it is just one tree. How are we ever going to verify that that is true? Also, if I were to go off to sleep now, then my tree would disappear. What about yours? You're going only by the experience of the conscious world. But there is a world that is beyond the conscious. There are other states of existence. There are meditative states where one can experience the dance of the atoms. The world of experience, the world of your experience. And if you do not account for your experience, then that is simply an abstraction. Don't get misled by gross materiality. There is the bamboo of the veena and its strings. But beyond that, there is the sound. What is the sound of the veena? It's not the vibrations of the string, nor the vibrations of the air that the sound passes through. It's not even the vibrations of the inner ear that receives the sound. It's none of these gross material entities. I still believe it is material, but not in the way that you conceive it. And then dwell on the fact that you can dream of a veena. You can even feel its wood in a dream, but you can also hear its music in a dream. There are worlds and worlds.
Do I have the audacity to intervene?
Yes.
Now, the professor has said so many things. These are all in the realm of present day high advanced physics. And in those days, it was in the realm of philosophy. He talked about atom being a word taken from Greek philosophy. Indian philosophers, Kanad dreamed of the smallest entity of the world that was called Anu. They obviously did not know that the Anu also can be subdividable subsequently. The word Paramanu doesn't exist anywhere in the Indian philosophy. It's only when the atom was divisible, the word Paramanu was created, and now we are talking about that things up. Then he said something about hallucination. Hallucination, why is it hallucination? Because again in physics we believe one thing, that, and that's true also, that everything is relative. He is considered as the Einstein of India. Einstein was the propagator of theory of relativity, general theory of relativity and the special theory of relativity. There it says, in fact it has been there earlier, which he crystallized further, that what we observe is from a frame of reference. What I observe from my frame of reference may be different from what another person observes from his frame of reference. Is there any meeting of minds? If for me something is hallucination, for somebody else it will be reality, talking to physics, talking of philosophy. In physics, that's, of course, is altogether different. I think that will give you enough insight to get into this book and appreciate the concept. A little heavy on the philosophy side. Thankfully, he has not written much about physics. That would have been still more, what do I say? Of course, I'm also a student of physics and he's a physicist. I can boldly say that would have been quite boring. Now, I'll ask him certain things about particle philosophy, and that will be of interest to the observers. In fact, there are some students of Department of Physics of Ravenshaw College also. They would also like. Professor, please tell me, what exactly is particle physics, number one? Why is particle physics called high energy physics? How does particle physics in the subatomic level, that is the electrons, protons, neutrons, neutrinos, and tachyons, whatever, how do they inspire confidence in the minds of a physicist to imagine the universe? The universe is also made of fundamental particles. High energy, to my understanding, is the energy that is generated in the cosmos. And there again, the fundamental particles have a very strong role to play. I don't know whether I've been able to put it very succinctly, but kindly enlighten us. Please also tell something about God particle.
Frankly, that is quite a different kind of talk altogether. And I would like to say, ये जानने के लिए देखिए मेरे बहुत ही famous YouTube videos. Subscribe करना नहीं भूलिएगा and all that. But since you asked the question, and it's relevant, of course, to this thing. As I said, particle physics, I mean, especially from the context of what we are discussing, is, in my view, the ultimate, is the pinnacle of atomism. And I'll just say this much, that there was this great synthesis in the 1920s and 30s. All of you have heard of quantum mechanics and big names like Schrödinger and Heisenberg and so on. And we have all gone through that, just a little bit of physics in school, where we've seen a picture of an atom where you have a nucleus and you have electrons floating around it and so on. And that very picture tells you, in fact, that that's not the whole story, because it doesn't tell you what the nucleus is and how the nucleus is held together. And when you start probing that, why are these particles being held together in that small space called the nucleus, that gives rise to the subject of nuclear physics and eventually particle physics, because it probes this much more fundamentally. And at that level of particle physics, what we now understand is this entire universe is made up of 12 kinds of particles. Okay. 12 is actually not the full story. It's like the Last Supper, it is 13. And the 13th is what is unfortunately been called the God particle. It's the Higgs particle. And this Higgs boson was necessary to complete this entire story. And that was actually discovered in 2012. The point is, we have for the very, very first time a completely consistent and verified atomistic theory, which has never happened in the history of humankind. And so that's actually a huge achievement. The people who are underplaying this the most are the particle physicists themselves, because the reason why they want to discover more, as my young students would like to, is they want actually to continue this business, right? नहीं तो बड़ा ताला लग जाएगा. If you say I've discovered everything and it's all over, then there's nothing more. Of course, there's more things to do, but there is a certain sense in which this phase of atomism has come to a conclusion, I would say.
I think the audience will still be curious to know why the name to Higgs boson, the 13th particle, 13th fundamental particle, was called God particle.
That was just a very, very bad joke, because one of the people who wanted to write a book on the Higgs particle, who was an experimentalist, and experimentally it was very difficult to search for this particle in the collider. And he was writing a book, a popular account of this, and in frustration he called it the goddamn particle. The publishers, you know how publishers are, this is a good forum to talk about publishers, in fact. So the publishers changed it from goddamn particle to God particle. Hota hai,
Yeah.
No, I want to, actually I like to read from a slightly different passage, because I lost a few members of the audience already thinking that, yes, this is like getting too heavy on physics. So if you mind, this...
I'll just introduce some interesting aspect of the book. He compares the lives of two persons. One is Ajita, who was the propagator of the Cārvāka philosophy, materialism philosophy of ancient India, who opposed the spiritualism and rebirth and also moksha. Then there is a boy called Moksha Mallar in Bombay. In the current scenario, he lives at such a time when Bombay province has been divided into two parts on linguistic basis, Gujarati and Marathi. I think he was in Bombay at that time, so
I'm not that old,
Okay.
thankfully. Moksh Malhar is a contemporary philosopher who actually is the son of a communist trade unionist. And his father is also a serious rationalist, gets bumped off for that reason. Mother dies of cancer. And so this boy is left alone at a very young age. So the Communist Party takes him over, and one of those people humorously even christens him as the son of communism. And the party is taking care of him. In return, this boy works in the printing press that they run, and he studies and becomes a professor of philosophy in Bombay University. And so that's the story. Interestingly, I don't know if you guys remember, but in 2005, 26 July, there were these really, really crazy floods in Bombay, where there were large number of deaths and reported, hugely underreported in the media. And it was very, very scary. And it was interesting because in the southern part of Bombay, there was no rain and floods. I was in the southern part at that time. My wife was in North Bombay, and I had no clue what she was going through. It was that terrible. So Moksh Malhar's wife actually gets lost in the floods, and this was a thing that interested me. What happens when a person gets lost? So I talked to lawyer friends. Apparently for 7 years, you cannot declare the person dead. How does one cope with a situation like that? So Moksh is going through that. In that state, he slowly turns to Buddhism. He goes to Bir and Dharamshala and becomes a Buddhist of sorts, turns to meditation and so on. So there is that turn in Moksha, which is interesting. Can I read a little bit about Moksh Malhar? I promise not to bore you as I did last time around. And I just want to give a slightly different flavor of the novel.
Before that, two short questions, Professor. Yeah. One is that your book is not really, chapters are not really serially numbered. 11L. The next chapter is numbered 12A. So kindly clarify this. And secondly, is there any connection between Moksha Malhar and the denial of moksha by the Cārvāka philosophers?
Yeah, I was playing on several things. There are some inside jokes which I'll keep to myself as an author. But the reason why my chapters are numbered and lettered in the way they are is because in each chapter I have avoided using one alphabet. So I'm a great kind of fan of a certain movement in French literature that happened in the 60s called the Oulipo. So there were these very interesting writers like Raymond Queneau and Georges Perec and even the early Italo Calvino. These were all members of Oulipo, and they basically said it's not just the content of a novel, but you have to play games with the form of a novel. Georges Perec, in fact, famously wrote a French novel called La Disparition, where he left out the letter E altogether, which also got famously translated in a book called A Void, which also has left out the letter E, which won the translation prize, in fact. And so kind of small tribute to Perec and Queneau and others. I left out one letter in each chapter. I wrote this book in 26 chapters. I numbered them from 1 to 26. But the letter that I've left out in each chapter also marks the chapter. So my first chapter I've left out B, the second chapter I've left out D, and so on. And I also invite the reader to read it either following the numerical order or the alphabetical order. And I think they'll read the same book. Okay, that's the challenge. Okay. So let me read a little bit about Moksh Malhar so that it gives you a slightly different flavor of the novel. So his wife, Moksh's wife, has... Also, I must warn you that this novel is a novel about grief. Almost every chapter someone is dying, so this comes with a statutory warning. Okay. So when he gets the call from a friend saying, so there's no news about his wife. She's lost in the floods. And he puts down the phone. After disconnecting the call, Moksh moves to the balcony and sits on the large swing that hangs from the door frame. It is Geet's favorite spot in the house. Geet is Moksh's wife. It is Geet's favorite spot in the house where she spends every morning with her cup of tea, listening to the birds chirping in the trees. Yeah, actually I'm writing about Bombay. In Bombay there are trees and birds, even though people don't believe that. It is that time of the evening now when the day is giving way to darkness. And in that crepuscular haze of twilight, as Moksh lies back suspended in mid-air, he realizes that he is simultaneously occupying three boundaries. Between day and night, between earth and sky, and between the inside and the outside. On the threshold, the limen, the domain of liminality. It is the failing light that often reveals the invisible. And it now becomes apparent to Moksh that there is also a fourth boundary that is staring him in the face, the one between life and death. This is the boundary that brings out most sharply the slippery character of Hermes, the messenger of Zeus, who is the god of the liminal, the god of all boundaries, including the one between life and death. It's a boundary that is replete with deceit and illusion, but then Hermes is also the guide to the wayfarer, bidding him to take a turn, a hermeneutic turn, so as to be able to delve deeper into the domains that are liminal. Stop it.
Professor, we have been told that we have just 5 minutes to wrap up. I have two questions. One is...
For particle physics, you need 13.6 billion years.
No,
you can't do it in 5 minutes.
I'm not going back to particle physics at all. I'm confining myself to the book and your earlier book. In this particular book, let me see some hilarious anecdotes. He mentions about certain sweets of classical Bombay. One is Sahi Aflatun. What exactly it is? Goes to the extent of saying Sukrat Halwa. Sukrat is Socrates. And I think something else.
Aristo.
So these are all fixed. These are you actually exist.
Aflatun is actually a sweet in Bombay, and it is using that it should. So with that, yeah.
And please tell us something about your earlier book, which was entirely on Bombay.
I really should thank you for that, because like a good friend told me, my earlier book seemed to have vanished without a trace. But it's a book that's dear to me. It's a book which I had originally called Palimpsest, and it's also in two parts. In fact, here there are two characters, Moksh, and there were two authors. I was the author. I wrote 9 chapters. The first 9 chapters were written by me. The second 9 chapters were written by God, and the last 19th chapter we are still fighting over. We've had a lot of acrimonious exchanges, and so it's still unsettled. So that book, eventually the publishers have to do something to a book, right? They feel empowered. So they said palimpsest is a word nobody will understand, so they changed it to twice written. I said if they don't understand the word palimpsest, they won't understand my book either. But the publisher had never gone past the first page, so how would they know? Okay, so I hope my publishers aren't listening, sorry. So but twice written is still, actually the rights are back with me and that book legally cannot be sold, but if you want to buy twice written, you can go to Amazon and still buy it. Again, talking about publishers.
We have enough time for 1 or 2 questions. Can you give them the mic?
I'll answer questions only if you allow me to use mathematical formulas.
Well, in that sense, this question is brought to you by someone whose knowledge at physics peaks at concave and convex lenses and only Newton's third law. And
oh
that
my
too
God,
is shaky at some
I
time.
left out lenses in the option when I was studying. I don't know anything about it. Don't ask me.
Well, my question to you is, do you feel constrained by scientific accuracy when you try writing fiction?
No, read my book, you'll find how inaccurate and imperfect it is. So you'll have the answer to it.
Thank you so much.
I have a very good artist friend called Ranbir Kaleka in Delhi. He does beautiful works where he does paintings and then he projects video on top of it. And when you have to do that, you have to get the perfect register, because the image has to really fall on top of the painting. So that register has to be absolutely, he does it with great precision. But then he was telling me he always leaves a tiny thing, he leaves a little imperfection there. And he says in that imperfection he finds art. I think that's probably.
So I have a question about philosophy for you.
Oh my God.
No. It's a yes/no question almost. Ajita,
I thought the answer was, oh my God, to all philosophical questions.
That is precisely what my question is about. I was going to ask you about the materialists, and you mentioned in passing that 2,500 years ago was a very special time, whether you lived in Greece or in Persia or you lived in the Indian subcontinent, that the materialists were very, very much a part of society, right?
Sorry? I couldn't hear.
Materialist philosophers were very much part of a mainstream.
Yes.
But there's so much emphasis on how human beings have, like the God particle, that human beings have a religious gene or something that encourages us as a species to believe in the existence of God, a single answer, a controlling factor. But what to me is sad is the materialists never got the kind of traction that the religionists got. And I wanted you to comment on that. Why did materialism sort of fall away and not get canonized in the same way that religious philosophies did?
Yeah, so I think that's it's a very deep question, in fact, with no complete answers. That the materialists or philosophers of other persuasions in that period were respected and honored is actually shown to us in many ways. In fact, I talk about it in one whole chapter when this Ajatashatru goes through his existential crisis, and he says he wants the 6 wise people from his kingdom to come and see him. His ministers get him these 6 people, of which Ajita is one of them, Makali Goshala is another, Mahavira is another, Sanjaya, and so on. So there are 6 of them. The fact that when the emperor wants to meet these wise men, the materialist and the Ajivika are all summoned, already indicates the level at that they were. Buddha is not there, and I have a whole chapter on it explaining why Buddha is not present in that meeting and so on. But there are also these caves. You probably know better about it than I do. The ones near आपके पटना के यहाँ Barabar caves, which are usually advertised as Buddhist and Jain caves, but there are some caves dedicated to the Cārvāka philosophers there and so on. And so they were obviously very respected. But then why is there nothing left? Not a fragment of anything that they have written is left. All that we know of them is through the works, Buddhist or Jain works, right? And so that again, I have some thesis about that in the novel, how the archives were destroyed and so on. There was certainly a backlash at some time. And if you go to much later, if you go to 11th century AD, when Madhvacharya wrote his huge encyclopedia of all philosophies, in that encyclopedia there's a small chapter on the Cārvākas. To his credit, he talks about them, but literally dismisses them in 3 pages, and the acrimony that with he deals with them is kind of visible. So there was clearly a backlash, and trying to establish religious philosophies as against these materialists. Yeah.
So we say, "Jamle jiye, bahut se jiya, karja kaat ke kyun piya?" I have just one question.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. We are running out of time, so we'll proceed.
Just one. I was a spectacular bad student of physics 50 years ago, and all our teachers of physics were angry people. Every time they met us, they scolded us. So how come you're a gentle? You're so gentle.
So you realize that I'm a bad physicist. In fact, that's why I'm trying to take shelter beyond novels, right? So.
I have met a gentle physicist.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor. Please go through the book.
Thanks
you
very
will love it. His first book, of course, is much more interesting. Many of us have. Why I'm saying this is that But is the first book available here? No, it's not available. You can get it from this thing.
Thank you so much for the session, sir.
That's
now
about
we'll
Bombay.
have
Bombay Mary Jaan. Or-
Jitendra
and
sir
then
felicitating
Amchi
the
Mumbai.
panel.
Maybe join a department for art.
एक हाथ में बुक लिए दूसरे हाथ में भूख लिए